All right, good morning, class. So today what we're going to look at, or continue to look at, we're going to continue to look at globalization and the development of the Caribbean. So what is globalization? Just a recap from last class. We look at globalization being the interconnectedness of the world, right? In other words, what we're saying here is that it's seeing the world as one space instead of several different spaces. So we are moving beyond our different country borders, our territorial borders, and our in other words, our own geographic space, and we're seeing everyone as all the different countries or all the different states as one place of interaction, right? So Peter Burrell and Vicky Randall states that globalization is a highly contested term defined in different ways that range from increasing global economic integration, in particular international trade, to processes whereby many social relations become relatively de-linked from territorial geography, and human lives are increasingly played out in the world as a single social system. So there are some very important terms that we need to note from this definition about globalization. So one, globalization is very contested, meaning that there are different views about globalization out there. Some people have argued that globalization is nothing new. And in fact, we have always been a globalized space. They have used also the triangular trade as one way to debunk the concept of globalization. They have said that since as early as the 14th, well, not the 14th, but from as early as the 15th century, you'd have the country has always been interconnected. People have moved from Europe to Africa, from Africa to the Caribbean, from Caribbean to North America. And so they say that the space has always been a global space. However, what we have seen in recent times, and I'm not discounting that view, is that within the last couple of years, what we have seen is that there's more economic integration or deepening of economic integration between countries. So, for example, back then, there is no way I could go online and order something from Amazon. Then from Amazon, send it to ship me. I go to ship me and I pick it up the next week. So for sure, we have had some level of deepening when it comes to trading or economies of the world. And also another point that we need to look out in this definition is the concept of social relations becoming relatively de-linked from territorial geography. And so there's a lot of people today who have a lot of different organizations, whether it is these organizations are what you call those organizations again, these non-government organizations. You have non-government or NGOs in Jamaica, you have NGOs in Europe, you have NGOs in North America, in Africa, and all of these non-government organizations tends to meet together and they advocate for the same issues, right? And then also another thing about globalization is that it sees the world in a single social system. So right now, most of you might have friends who are you have never met them physically or face to face, but you have met those friends on the internet and you communicate with them and all of these different stuff. So the concept of globalization involves greater interconnectedness and the shrinking of the world as one space. Always remember that it sees the world as one space. And that is what basically envelope the definition of globalization. There are several different evidence of globalization today that clearly affects us. So we have, for example, when we had the world recession in 2008 to 9, some countries to 10, then you have the euro crisis. When we look at our foreign exchange market, when we look at transnational cooperation, which accounts for 70% of the world trade, and we mean in transnational cooperation, things like Burger King, KFC, the different call centers that we have, transnational meaning that they are beyond one border. They are located in many different borders. These are large companies that exist between in several different countries and they work together for profits. And so when we look at all of these these economic factors, we see for sure that the world is very, very integrated, especially when it comes to the recession, the world recession. Another perfect example that we can add on this chart about the interconnectedness of the world is COVID-19. Yes, COVID-19 shows that the world is interconnected. And so globalization is a reality. It's not like a disease or some form of virus happen in one part of the world and it remains there. But because there is a lot of travel in terms of goods and services between countries, increase traveling, and people are moving from one area to the next, then COVID-19 has also proved to us that the world is very connected. So a disease that actually started in Wuhan, China, basically shut down the entire world. Most of us have never been to China, but that disease that started there basically have us right now in a lockdown right here in Jamaica. Not only Jamaica, but all over the Caribbean, Barbados, Trinidad, St. Vincent, uh, the Cayman Islands, and not only that, persons have died as a result of this disease. So it is very clear that the world is interconnected. Other evidence of globalization is that the world is more socially integrated. So it's not that the world is only economically integrated, as in the case that I've presented earlier before, but it is also socially integrated. We have the internet, we have social media, we have a lot of different social organizations, the mobilization, for example, like Black Lives Matter. And right now we have a lot of transnational crimes that is happening beyond borders. So you can have, for example, at the drugs trade in Jamaica that starts in Colombia. Well, it starts in Colombia. They move the drugs from Colombia to Trinidad, from Trinidad to Jamaica, from Jamaica to Haiti, from Haiti to the United States. That's several different territories that's involved in a crime in terms of passing illegal drugs from one area to get to the next. It has moved from several different territories. So there's a lot of transnational crime that is taking place as a result of the, the interconnectedness of the world. In fact, In fact, we can also look at this recently with a plane that landed in somewhere in Clarendon. It was a drug plane that was taking drug from one country to the next, and it had its issues, and then it it landed somewhere in Clarendon. I believe it was Rocky Point. So for sure, the world is interconnected. Another thing in terms of our interconnectedness as the world is through our culture. If we look at our culture in the world, there's a lot of things that we adopt from each other in terms of our culture, our music, or dance, all of these different stuff that shows that the world is interconnected. And then the bodies in the world that makes decision, yes. For example, you have the annual G20 meeting. This is where the 20 top countries in the world meet together to make decision. Then you have the IMF, you have the UN, United Nations, you have the World Bank. So for example, like the World Bank and the IMF, they give money or loan money to countries. So they operate like a big bank that countries go to when they're in need. And also recently, as a result of the pandemic, we are hearing more about this other organization, the World Health Organization, which is also another example of the interconnectedness of the world. In fact, we have heard on the news several times where our government officials say that we have to wait until the World Health Organization, who pass or approve a COVID vaccine in order for us to use it. So we can see here that the world is operating as one when it comes to dealing with the pandemic. And these are through global organizations. So these are some examples of global organization. Now, there are several different facilitators of globalization, right? And some of these are the World Bank, which actually provides finances for development projects in countries. You have the IMF, which actually ensures the financial stability of the world, or if a country is in debt, then these countries will go to the IMF to implement programs in their country to give them money. Then you also have the World Trade Organization that regulates trade in terms of goods and services, in terms of the rules. Then we have other things that facilitate globalization, like transnational organization and companies. We also have technology, which is a major way factor, or major facilitator of globalization. And when we talk about transnational corporation or company, we're talking about companies and organizations that is basically involved in the activities of more than one countries. All right, so these are some organizations, or these are some examples of different bodies that facilitate globalization. Now, let us look at the World Trade Organization. And the World Trade Organization came into being in 1995. So that is the first one we're going to look at. Now, the World Trade Organization, this is one of the youngest of the international organization. And so the WTO, replaced what we actually had as the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, which is GATT, which was established after World War II. Now, what are some of the objectives of the WTO? So one The primary aim of the WTO is to implement the new World Trade Agreement. So meaning that we should have the WTO is very interested in all the countries in the world having one trade agreement. Another is to promote a multilateral trade. Also, it's to promote free trade between countries and to abolish tariff and non-tariff barriers. In fact, one of the biggest barriers for trade in the world, and you know for sure, is tariff, meaning taxes. Taxes can be a major barrier when it comes to, to trade, and also non-tariff barriers include things like policies like embargo. So for example, one barrier of trade in the world, one non-tariff barrier of trade in the world is the United States policy on Cuba, where the United States put a policy to say that because Cuba is a communist country or Cuba practices socialism, then countries or people cannot travel to Cuba or trade with Cuba freely. US companies cannot trade with Cuba as freely as they want. So the WTO is aim is to remove those non-tariff barriers, and the tariff barriers include things like taxes. So when you go and you purchase something online and you get your bill from ShipMe, you will see the taxes that you have to pay. In fact, most of us try our best not to buy a lot of things at once because we don't want to pay all of that, all of the taxes that comes with it. Another thing, objective of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is to enhance competitiveness among all trading partners so as to benefit the consumer. So for them, they believe that if there's competitiveness across the world, then and people are able to trade. If I'm able to buy my goods from Europe, and if China is selling the goods at a cheaper rate, then I'm able to switch to China. And then if Europe realize that everybody is going to China to buy goods, then they could reduce their price and we then go back to them. So it's supposed to promote some form of competitiveness, and that competitiveness is to benefit us, the consumer, in our individual territories. Now, another objective is to increase the level of production and productivity with a view to increase the level of employment in the world. So according to the WTO, if we can increase production, that means if we increase production in our individual countries, our productivity, then guess what? We'll be able to trade that surplus of produce, and that will increase employment in the world. We are yet to see some of these realized. Also, to expand and utilize world resources in the most optimum manner. Also, to improve the level of living, or basically the standard of living for the global population by economic development, and also to take special steps for the development of the poorest nation. So these are some of the objectives of the WTO, or the World Trade Organization. And always remember that the World Trade Organization, it's about monitoring international trade between countries. All right. So we can just summarize the objectives is free and fair trade plus trade without obstruction. That is basically what they are promoting at the WT, the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. Some of the functions of the World Trade Organization, and the function includes that it's the implementing agreements. So we know for sure that it implement the agreements, the trade agreements, and it monitor it, and it the trade agreement between countries. It ensures that countries are following the agreement that was signed. In fact, another function is the cooperating with the IMF and the World Bank and its associates for the coordination of global trade policy. In fact, the World Trade Organization works directly with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank. All three of them works together. So, for example, if Jamaica need to borrow money from the IMF or Jamaica needs World Bank loan, Jamaica must be a member of the World Trade Organization and must follow the rules of the World Trade Organization in order to borrow from the IMF and also to get aid from the World Bank. And then if countries have problem between each other in terms of trade, the World Trade Organization is there to settle those disputes between countries. And it's also always reviewing the trade agreement. So that is one of the thing. And it provides technical assistance to different countries to ensure that they follow the rules of the World Trade Organization. And also it helps them, its main aim is to facilitate free trade, or what we call trade liberalization. So free trade is the same thing as trade liberalization. Now, if we look at the structure of the World Trade Organization, it has about 160 member countries, and these countries account for almost 95% of the world trade. So the countries that are not a part of WTO, they have a very difficult time in accessing certain goods and services in terms of the world trade. The structure of the organization, there's a ministerial conference that meets every 2 years. There's a general council. There's a body that handles dispute, and then another body that handles trade policy, always review trade policies. And then you have the different sub-councils of the World Trade Organization. So the most powerful part of the World Trade Organization is the Ministerial Conference, which happens every 2 years. And so this is the utmost decision-making body of the WTO, in the Ministerial Conference, which usually meets every 2 years. It brings together all the member countries together, and they make the decision about how the organization should run. So the everyday running of the organization is really from the General Council, right? But the major decisions that are made comes from the Ministerial Council. And so the General Council acts on the decisions that are made at the Ministerial Council, same thing with the Trade Policy Review Body and the Dispute Settlement Body. The World Trade Organization is entrenched in a belief that is called neoliberalism. And this is basically the idea that trade between countries should be free, so you have free trade without barriers. And free trade, once the countries trade freely, then the world countries will become prosperous, right? It also believes in liberal democracy, meaning that people should vote vote for their leaders of their individual country, and they also believe in world peace. In fact, neoliberalism is a policy that was signed in Washington that is also called the Washington Consensus. Now, there are two schools of thought about the impact of the World Trade Organization on the Caribbean, and these are the two thoughts. So the neoliberals are the persons that believe that if we trade freely between countries and we have uh, governments that we elect, not in the case of we have free and fair elections, then the country will be peace, the world will be peaceful, and countries will be prosperous. And so for some people, the World Trade Organization has a very positive outlook on the world. So some people believe that in the Caribbean, or neoliberals believe that the World Trade Organization actually helps the Caribbean countries. While the dependency school or people who are from the Marxist school, they believe that the World Trade Organization has a very negative effect on Caribbean countries. Now, those who are from the neoliberal schools, they argue that, or those who have that view, that the World Trade Organization actually supports traded in the development in the Caribbean, and as a result of this, it will lead to poverty reduction, and it will also help to develop our infrastructure, our road, our buildings, and all of these different stuff. And also, they also believe that goods, the, being a part of the World Trade Organization, actually provide the Caribbean with larger market for their goods. So Jamaica, instead of selling their bananas or their yams, or Grenada selling their spices, or Ghana selling their rice solely to just Caribbean countries, being a part of the World Trade Organization, you have a larger market, so you can sell your goods to places, all the countries who are part of the World Trade Organization, those 160 countries. So you have a larger market. So you sell your goods to the North America, to Brazil, to Africa, Europe, Asia, all of these different stuff. And for others, another impact by the neoliberals is that they say that the World Trade Organization provides a lot of opportunities, economic opportunities for Caribbean countries, because a business person from China or from some part of Europe can come into the Caribbean and invest. But the dependency school, or what we call the Marxist school, they say that the World Trade Organization is basically reinforces colonialism, and it makes the Caribbean structurally underdeveloped and also structurally dependent on North America and Europe, right? And to some extent, there's some truth to this, because when we look at the COVID-19, and all our Caribbean countries tend to depend solely on tourism as a form of foreign exchange. And we have seen where with COVID-19, borders have been closed, all the international borders have been closed. And because we're structurally dependent on North America and Europe for tourists, we have seen where all our countries in the Caribbean have suffered economically as a result of this dependency on the developed countries. One perfect example where the World Trade Organization negatively affected the Caribbean was the banana case study, right? And so in the Caribbean, for years, because we were British, well, those of us who were British colonies are part of Britain at the time. Once we got independent, Britain said that, listen, we are going to ensure that you have preference to our market. So countries like Jamaica, countries in the Eastern Caribbean like St. Vincent and St. Lucia, they were granted a preferential treatment from Britain, meaning that they could export as the region 105,000 tons of fruits per year without paying any form of import tax, right? So that is the preference that they would have received. Now, Latin American banana plantations are way larger than plantations in Jamaica and the Eastern Caribbean. In fact, one banana plantation in Costa Rica is larger than the island of Jamaica and the Eastern Caribbean combined together. And so, and not only that, these plantations are owned by Americans, right? And they didn't like the fact that the Caribbean could export 105,000 tons of bananas into Britain without paying any tax. So what the United States did, the United States brought the Caribbean to the World Trade Organization and said that we all signed to an agreement of free trade and no territory must have any form of preferential agreement, right? So the same thing that should go for Europe, that goes for Latin America, should go also for the Caribbean. It should not be that the Caribbean bananas are able to go into Europe or Britain without paying taxes, and Latin American bananas going and they have to pay taxes. And in fact, one of the things is that as small islands, and because we were connected to Britain, this preferential agreement gave us a guarantee market in Britain. In fact, our bananas, once it go into Britain, we actually paid, our bananas were way cheaper than Latin American banana. But we signed on to the World Trade Organization, and the United States with Latin American countries said, listen, you should not have a preferential agreement. And as a result of that, the World Trade Organization ruled that the preferential agreement was illegal. And I thought that, well, my personal view is that we in the Caribbean just produce 7% of Europe imports in terms of their banana. The other almost 90% of the bananas are produced from other larger territories. We are very small, but that was the ruling that was passed. We had a lot of benefits in terms of bananas, right? In the Caribbean, the bananas, it employed a lot of people in the Caribbean. In fact, in Jamaica, it was 8% of our export. For the Windward Island, places like St. Vincent, it accounted for over 50%. We had over 45,000 persons who were growing banana. It was a sure market. Britain was a sure market for banana. We gained a lot of wealth and employment from that. But the ruling in 1997 that say Europe and the UK must give Latin American bananas the same treatment as the Caribbean and Africa, meaning that if they are going to give preference to the Caribbean, they must give preference also to Latin America. If they are not going to give preference to Latin America, they cannot give preference to the Caribbean. And that ruling affected our banana industry in the Caribbean significantly. So the preferential agreement was removed, and as a result of that, we had high unemployment in the Caribbean. Our export to countries were reduced significantly, and that affects also our GDP. And so what we tend now to have in the Caribbean is that we are not producing enough banana as we should. And what we're doing now is importing bananas from Latin America instead of growing banana for ourselves, because basically the banana industry was destroyed. In the Eastern Caribbean, the banana growers shrunk from 45,000 to 3,000, right? And so it basically damaged the entire economy of the world, or not the world, but the Caribbean. It is not only the banana industry that the World Trade Organization has destroyed in the Caribbean, but for example, we had a very thriving milk industry where we sell milk, that is the liquid, and our milk has been replaced with powdered milk. And so as a result of cheap powdered milk coming into the Caribbean, right now we don't have a lot of milk on our shelves in our supermarket. In fact, we need to ask this very important question: can we compete with the world? Can we really trade as countries in the Caribbean and compete with countries in North America, for example, United States, Canada? Can we compete with China? Can we compete with Europe? Can we compete with Asia? Can we compete with Latin America, that basically one of their plantation is larger than our island? Or put all of the Eastern Caribbean with Jamaica together, and one of those banana plantation is higher than that. In fact, when we look at the national budget of Jamaica, the national budget is around 700 to 800 billion Jamaican dollars, which is like 5 to 6 billion US dollars, right? And one company in North America, Apple, their profit per year is $53.4 billion. So Apple as a country, as a private organization, right? Our corporate organization, their budget is 53.4 billion US dollars a year. That's not their budget, that's the amount of money that they make yearly. And in Jamaica, our national budget is about 5 to 6 billion dollars. So basically, Apple can take over our country, can run the profits from Apple. If Apple decide that 1 year that they are going to give us all their profits, trust me, we'll be good. We'll be able to build roads. We'll be able to pay teachers' salary increase. We'll be able to pay nurses and police their increase. We're able to do so much. And so the question is, can we survive, or can we compete with our international partners as small island developing states? Now let us look at another organization that facilitates development. And sorry, not development, but globalization. And that is the IMF. So we have looked at some of the pros and the cons of the World Trade Organization. And now we're going to look at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So the IMF has around 187 countries a part of it. And it basically wants to ensure that countries who are its members are able to be financially stable, right? And it said that its aim is to promote high unemployment in countries and sustainable economic growth. So we are supposed to be growing economically and also to reduce poverty within the countries. So that is one of the aim of the IMF. Now the World Bank, on the other hand, is very, very important, because the World Bank provides financial and technical assistance to developing countries. Remember that we no longer use the word third world countries, but we use the word developing countries, because third world tends to give a negative view on or discriminate against countries who are developing. In fact, we didn't get a chance to develop. We were thrown into this international saga, if that's a proper way to put it. But the aim of the World Bank is to help countries to reduce poverty, giving them technical assistance on projects in terms of building schools, hospitals, infrastructure, communication, reforming the governments of third world countries. And so the question is, why IMF and the World Bank? Why do we need to be a part of the IMF, and why do we need to be a part of the World Bank? And the reason for this is that in the Caribbean today, we have high debt, meaning that we don't have enough, we borrow so much that we don't have enough money to spend on building schools and fixing the country. We don't have a lot of capital investment, meaning not a lot of people invest in the Caribbean as they should. Every minute we have natural disaster that destroys our economy. There's a lot of private capitals that move outside of the Caribbean, and there's always external shocks that we have no control over. And so we're always in debt. We're always in financial problem. And perfect example, we can also add the COVID-19 shocks to our economy. Look at the shock we in the Caribbean, we have no control over COVID, the different external shocks of COVID-19, and we have no control over the external things, like, for example, the recession that took place. And in fact, when hurricane come every year, and earthquake and all of these different stuff, we have no control over that. And so as a result of that, countries need the IMF and they need the World Bank. So it must be noted that the institution of the World Bank and the IMF deals with global finances. They provide money to help with development. It must be noted that in order for a country to become a member of the World Bank, it must first join the IMF before becoming a member of the World Bank. And the same thing, they need to also be members of the World Trade Organization. All three of them work together. Now, when you're going to the IMF, there's a thing that you sign as a country that is called the letter of intent. And so the letter of intent stipulates the preconditions and the prior actions, or where there are quantified performance criteria, meaning if you're going to the bank to borrow money, you're going to the bank to borrow money. The bank is going to say, every year you're supposed to pay 50,000, well, every month you're supposed to pay $50,000 on this loan that you borrow. In the same way, the letter of intent goes a bit deeper than that, right? Or wider than that. The letter of intent not only say that you need to borrow, you not only need to pay back these money, but there are things that you must put in place in order to get the money. So before you get the money, you have to put in some form of structure and restructuring of the economy. And while you're getting the money, you get the money in portions. And so with that, you also need to put some actions in place. So that is what is in the letter of intent. This is what you sign before you borrow the money. And this is what we call conditionalities, right, of the IMF. So before you get the money, there are certain conditions. You have to agree to those conditions. And if you don't agree to those conditions, you cannot get the money. Now, some of these conditions are very controversial, right? Because one, sometimes they ask you, and I don't think it is bad for you to put in place anti-corruption measures, because they know that most Caribbean countries, and in particular, Jamaica is very, very corrupt. And then when it comes to the IMF also has a condition that say we need to sell some of our industries or companies, government-owned companies, to the private sector. So for example, the Jamaica Public Service was once owned by the government of Jamaica. They are saying that you need to sell, that you need to privatize it, sell it to private individuals or companies. Now we are hearing talk that the National Water Commission is going to be privatized. Then we're also hearing talk that people are saying that JUTC, the government need to stop own the JUTC, but should sell it to private individuals. Now we need to look at some of the pros and cons of privatization, right? And in your individual classes, then you can go into some of those issues. Now, sometimes the IMF and the World Bank will tell countries that, one, in order for them to get money, privatization is one, but they need to reduce the number of government employees. They need to reduce the salary of persons. They need to provide subsidies on food for international companies. They need to open their countries, right? So these are some of the negative effects. Well, these are some of the conditions of the IMF. Now, what are some of the effects of the IMF? One of the policy of the IMF is that we should provide tax holidays to drive investment, meaning we shouldn't give international companies who are coming into Jamaica, they shouldn't be entitled to pay tax, right? You should give them tax holiday. That will encourage them to come. But one of the things that if we are removing taxes from the private companies, what is going to happen is that we, the citizens of the country, will have to pay that gap when it comes to taxation. So we are now paying more in income tax and more in GCT. And so we have higher taxes, lower government spending, removal of subsidies, the privatization of state industry, cutting social spending, and the reduction or to reduce the public sector. So some of the negative effects of these policies is that once IMF tells us to implement these policies in our countries, what happens is that if we are providing tax holiday, that is going to cause a loss of revenue, government revenue. And so the government must find another way to fill this gap. And this is usually in the form of property tax, GCT, and VAT for some Caribbean countries. You also have reduction in social spending, meaning they say that we can't spend all of this money on building schools and building hospitals and all of these different stuff. Because they said you don't have the money, we are lending you money, and you don't have it, you shouldn't overspend. So guess what? You should ensure that you spend within your means. Good idea, yes, but it can also have some negative effects. So we have less money for healthcare and education, and we have to repay our debt, right? So before we spend any money for health and education, we need to pay our debt first. And IMF programs in the Caribbean has led to high unemployment, and it has also devalued our currency. So if we look at the Jamaican dollar as one example of a devalued currency as a result of IMF policy, in 1969, it was one US dollar worth $1.20 Jamaican, right? And by 2017, one US dollar worth 128 Jamaican dollar 26 cents. What is the problem with devalued currency? We are not producing as much. We buy goods in US dollars. And as a result of that, if the money is devalued, we are going to pay more for goods and services, right? Uh, Overall. And so that is not good, especially for the poorest in the society. Now, let us look at another popular agreement that is on our exam, and this is the Economic Partnership Agreement. So due to the negative effects of the World Trade Organization ruling, right? The World Trade Organization basically say that Caribbean, African, and Pacific countries should not have any form of preferential agreement. Or if they are giving preferential agreement to Caribbean, African, and Pacific country, they need to also give it to Latin American countries and other countries in the world. The Caribbean countries complained and they said, listen, we cannot compete due to our small size. We are very small, we can't compete. We have constant natural disasters. We are developing nation. Our economies are weak and external shocks, the recession, COVID, all of these, well, COVID is now, but recession, and we could include COVID right now as a part of it. And so what happened as a result? The European Union said, listen, we understand that you are going through all of these issues. You need economic growth. You need job creation. You need to follow the World Trade Organization. And so the European Union signed a special agreement with Caribbean, African, and Pacific countries that is called the Economic Partnership Agreement, or the EPA, in 2008. Now, the EPA was signed between 15 countries. These include CARICOM states plus Dominican Republic. So CARICOM states plus Dominican Republic is what we call CARIFORUM. All right? And they signed this agreement with Europe. So the European Union said, what we are going to do with the EPA is that we're going to create a scheme where we're going to have a free trade area between the European nation and these territories. So liberalization of trade meant that European Union members could trade in the Caribbean, agriculture and fisheries, banana, rice and sugar, and they're able to access a larger market. So Caribbean countries are able to access European markets. And so these are some of the World Trade Organization, right? And in fact, they would trade within the context of the World Trade Organization. That's what I actually meant. Now, another area that facilitates globalization is a transnational organization. And so we have national, transnational corporation, or multilateral companies, and their headquarters are in countries like the USA, UK, France, Germany, Japan. And some examples of these companies are like Facebook, Apple, Burger King, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, the BPO, the business processing outsourcing industry. The BPO are what we call the call centers. And right now in Jamaica, we have a lot of call centers. And so it is very clear, ladies, that these are some areas that facilitate globalization. Now, what are some of the impact and the response to globalization? So globalization has been both positive and negative to the Caribbean. Some of the advantages of globalization in terms of trade is that we have increased availability of goods and services. So from both the traditional markets, so we have a large quantity of goods can be imported into the Caribbean at low prices. Check, for example, PriceSmart. Quartz is one example. A lot of people don't know, but Quartz is a UK company that's in the Caribbean. Ashley, so we are able to access goods, furniture from North America or UK into the Caribbean. We are able to access certain things here. PriceSmart is like going abroad and buying. So no longer we have people sending barrels to us in the Caribbean. We can go to PriceSmart and buy in bulk. And also, they are saying that another positive effect of globalization is that it provides employment for Caribbean people. So when international companies come into the Caribbean, like the BPO sector or the call centers come into the Caribbean and establish companies here, it provides employment for our people. And also, we are able to preserve our cultural heritage and also transport our culture abroad. So we can use the Economic Partnership Agreement, the EPA, because there's a provision in there in the EPA that say that our cultural ambassadors, our musicians, our dancers, those who are in the theater, are able to go into Europe, access Europe, and they don't have to pay certain taxes there. And there's widespread use of technology. And then we have the development of shipping agency. For example, like ShipMe, because we are interconnected, you can buy something in North America, you send it to a ShipMe address. There's so many different Caribbean shipping agencies that have come about. So there are some positives when it comes to globalization. But there are some negatives. So capital leakage, where the transnational corporation remits their profit. So in other words, there are companies like Digicel that make so much money from the Caribbean, but most of that profit is not spent in the Caribbean. It is sent back to Europe, right? And so that is not good. Same thing with the tourism sector, where a lot of people come and they own hotels here, and most of that money go back there. The same thing when it comes to the hotel industry. Instead of buying goods from us, they say that it's cheaper to buy banana from Latin America. You get more banana, and the banana look better for them. They say that it is better to buy fruits and vegetables from other countries in the world. It is better to do eggs. It is better to buy the furniture from abroad. So instead of using those same using our local manufacturers and farmers to produce certain goods. And so these are some of the disadvantages. And then the next thing is that when we rely heavily on foreign investment, that is not good. And it also weakens our Caribbean export, because if we have free trade, you're going to find that, and even in Jamaica, you'll realize that, and you go to PriceSmart, you realize that the foreign products at times are way cheaper than our Jamaican products or Caribbean products. And so what happened is that we are not able as Caribbean countries to compete. We're not able to compete, and we're not able to export as we would want to. And so we have a decline in production. Then that can also lead to brain drain because there's no job there. And then when you also have technology helps with the downsizing of our manufacturing sector. Not only the manufacturing sector, but our servicing sector. like JPS closed down quite a lot of their customer service centers because they said that people now can pay their bills online. The same thing with the banks. Right now, if you're going to the bank, there's no teller in the bank because they're using technology. And so the technology that facilitates globalization affects the affects uh, affects the Caribbean in terms of employment. And then also there's a cultural imposition of the first world on the Caribbean. So we are doing things like North America, right? We are not North America, but we adopt almost every single thing from them in terms of culture. And so our culture in the Caribbean, there's some level of cultural erasure going on. Then when it comes to politics, as a result of globalization, it's weaken our sovereignty as nation, meaning that because we are weak and developing state, we are bullied. We can't make our own political decision. So because the I'm going to use the example of Venezuela, because Venezuela has been a country that has traditionally helped Caribbean countries with oil because they know that they have a large reserve of oil there, and the United States doesn't support Venezuela, the government there. What has happened is that, or some of our leaders in the Caribbean, in particular Jamaica, Bahamas, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, have basically afraid to trade with Venezuela. Not all Caribbean countries, because places like Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, not Guyana, St. Vincent, Dominica, Grenada continues their relationship with Venezuela. But Jamaica seems to be very afraid to assert her sovereignty. And what has happened is that the company that was owned by the oil company here, Petrojam, that was owned by Venezuela, the United States said that Jamaica cannot trade with Venezuela. And because Jamaica fear economic sanctions by the United States, they took over the company, the Venezuelan company, and they didn't pay Venezuela any money for all the money that they would have invested in Petrojam. All right. And also there's a lot of exploitation of our resources. When we look at the mining sector and the bauxite sector, and the government tend to be very loyal to foreign investors than the citizens in the Caribbean. And we can look, for example, in Jamaica, where our beaches, the investor said, listen, we don't want nobody on the beaches. If we're going to build a hotel, we don't want nobody on the beaches. And the government said, oh, we need the investment, we need the money, we need the taxes, we need this, we need that. And so guess what? We're not going to allow you, the private citizens of, well, not the private, the citizens of the country to access those beaches. And so we are not able to benefit. And private sector come in and they want to mine some of our very environment protected area, and that has caused a lot of issues for us in the Caribbean. So what we have done is to look at the impact on our response. The truth is that there's a lot of negative impact and also positive impact of globalization on the Caribbean. But what our response has been like is that some of them we have adopted to, some we have not adopted to. Some is a challenge for us as citizens, and some is really not here nor there. All right.